What I want to do now, before we break for dinner, is to look in rather more detail at the social context which the Ummah has devised for this process of education. If the religion itself is education, what are the institutions, the frameworks, the methodologies, the social contexts, the attitudes towards learning and the learned that classical Islam has historically favoured? Well, the paradigm is, of course, the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam himself, from the first word iqra, which suggests that he was to recite, in other words, not just to be taught, but to be a teacher of others. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has been the great educator and hence the first teacher and the first model for Islamic educators. What he did in the house of al-Arqam ibn Abil Arqam, near al-Suffa in Mecca, was to teach. That was the first madrasa of Islam. In Medina, the centre of education was the mosque, and particularly the Suffa. And we can say that the most important features of classical Islamic education and institutions and attitudes can be traced back, in most cases, to the usages of the Suffa, the veranda, to the south of the house of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam in Medina. And again, if by any mischance you haven't yet forked out your several dollars for your copy of this Fath al-Bari translation, there is a footnote which you'll find on page 37, which talks a bit about these Ahl al-Suffa, spiritual elite amongst the Sahaba. A number of sound hadith speak about them. And one of the early ulama who talked about the Ahl al-Suffa and what the Suffa means as a kind of first university of Islam was Imam al-Hakim al-Nizaburi, who many of you will know as one of the great hadith compilers of early Islam, author of the great Kitab al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain, in which he lists all of the hadiths which meet the conditions for authenticity set by Bukhari and Muslim, but which were not included by them in their collections. And he has a number of other introductory works on hadith. But when he talks about these hadith of the Suffa, Imam al-Hakim indicates what was the view of the early hadith scholars on the function of this academic institution. So he writes, I have pondered these hadiths concerning the people of the Suffa, and I have found them to be among the greatest of the Sahaba in scrupulousness, in wara, and tawakkul, and in constant service of Allah and His Messenger. For them, Allah chose what He chose for His Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, by way of poverty, neediness, and humbleness in worship of Allah and leaving the dunya to its people. They are the group to which the Sufis belong generation after generation, so that whoever follows their sunnah and their patient endurance of renouncing the things of this world and their familiar intimacy with poverty and their refusal to beg are in every age the followers of the Ahl al-Suffa and the people of reliance upon their Creator. Obviously, as a good grammarian, Imam al-Hakim couldn't accept the spurious etymology of the word Sufi from Suffa. Sometimes it's said that the word Sufism actually comes from the Suffa, but any basic knowledge of Arabic morphology will tell you that that's not the case, and early Arab users of the language would never have devised such an etymology. But for Imam al-Hakim, as one of the great hadith scholars, certainly the Suffa are the early paradigm, the authenticating paradigm for the discipline of Sufism, because of their gathering together in one place, because their institution is an institution of learning, because of their proximity to a holy teacher, and because of their awareness of the baseness of the dunya in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There were perhaps 70 of the al-Suffa, according to some estimations as many as 300, but we have lists of about 70. So that, if you like, is the first educational institution of Islam, Islam in its developed form. These people were not just taught fiqh and the ahkam, but they were also transformed by the presence of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. So from the very outset of education in Islam, we may say that Islam sought to cultivate the entire human being. The fiqh, which is for the body, and the tasawwuf, which is for the soul. One without the other leaves a human being partial, lopsided.